Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting podcast of CodeNinja Global, a podcast dedicated to bringing you key industry insights from some of the most renowned thought leaders across the globe. In today's episode, we're being joined by Mr. Zaid Munir, an entrepreneur, a professor, and the CEO of Scytalelabs. A trailblazer in the world of blockchain technology, Zaid has led Scytalelabs to become one of the leading providers of blockchain solutions, empowering enterprises across Europe and North America with innovative technologies. Together, we'll deep dive into the transformative impact of blockchain, its current landscape, core challenges, and the road ahead. Hi, Zaid. Welcome to the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. How are you?
Thank you, Tamur. I'm doing great, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Well, I'll just get right into it. And I personally believe that blockchain has been touted as a revolutionary technology, but despite it being there for over a decade, there is still a lack of general awareness around it. And as the market is projected to hit somewhere around $40 billion this year, at what stage would you position the global adoption for this technology?
So, blockchain has been around for some time. It's maturing, right? So, I've been in the industry when it was just taking up at the very start. So, being in the industry for almost a decade, I've seen it mature quite tremendously, right? So now we have got all the building places, infrastructure in place that we can build on top of. So just to mention some of the things that we are doing. So we recently are working with UN IFAD, and we are developing the pilot for fund traceability. So it's a pilot that would raise funds in fiat, crypto, and later on CBDCs. And the project is expected to be conducted in 190 countries. They have got a massive reach and they want to expand it to all the countries that there are. So it's a massive project, and it has recently won the World Future Awards. So having worked with projects like these, there are countless others. So I can say that it's very well positioned, but its use is mostly in enterprises, right? Enterprises and governments are taking strides in it, and they are the ones who would be adapting it the most. For the consumers, it's mostly crypto, trading
Right.
and DeFi. But most of the benefits are large organizations and enterprises that are doing billions of dollars in revenue, or governments that need more control over things and to streamline and make them more efficient.
Okay, I think that's quite intriguing. And in some ways, I just feel like cryptocurrencies, they've sort of taken over the debate when it comes to the technology. But there's so much more potential when it comes to blockchain. And you being from the industry, could you tell us about some of the notable startups or very unique sort of global projects that has helped brought blockchain into the mainstream?
So there's a lot of work going on. So we've been associated with Xmana, right? So Xmana is the sports loyalty application, and they had this partnership with Inter Miami, USA. And they are their official loyalty application, right? So that is a massive leap, right? So all the fans of Inter Miami using an application that is built on blockchain, and my team especially built the blockchain part for it. So it's getting a lot of adoption over there. If I talk about other things, so we can talk about startups like Crossmint. One of the fundamental challenges that we have with blockchain is in adoption, right? Because 90% or more people, right, they do not use crypto. And one has to wonder what the reason is. One of the primary reasons is the user experience, right? So people are not tech savvy, right? Just using a cell phone does not make a person tech savvy. A person has to be a power user sort of to use crypto, right? He needs to know ins and outs of what the device is using, the security, and also he has to have a certain amount of training to be able to use the platforms and use them securely, right? So user adoption in Web3 is very much limited because of user experience. So there are startups like Crossmint, which are making strides in that thing. They are simplifying the user adoption, making it very streamlined and to the point where users can use the biometric or even using a password to, engage with the platforms that are DeFi enabled or crypto enabled. That's a big thing. Other than that, there are startups like Imperia that are working on information, right? How to get validated information. That is something that is required by a lot of organizations and governments alike and businesses who want to make legitimate products out of it. So these are things that that come to mind straight away.
Right. I think that it's so interesting, and the fact to know that so much work is being done from here, Pakistan as well. I think that makes me feel like there's so much more potential in our people as well. And being in the thick of things, what role would you feel like these emerging markets like ours perhaps have in the accelerating the adoption of blockchain particularly?
So, like you mentioned, that Pakistan is blessed. There are lots of talented individuals over here, right? So, most of my team is based in Pakistan, right? Especially all the tech team is in Pakistan, and we've been able to achieve quite great success with the same team. So, one of the projects that we delivered, it's open source. It's Casper Swap. So, we subcontracted with Scytalelabs and developed the complete DEX in-house over here. So that involved the contracts, it involved all the infrastructure at the back end, the user interface, and we delivered the product end to end. So considering that it is handling millions of dollars and is actually in production, so I would say that's quite a big accomplishment for Pakistan to have been at the back of such a big project. And being in this industry specifically for 8 years, all the projects that we've done are on blockchain, right? And I can say for a fact that Pakistani people are very talented. They're very, driven. And given the right opportunities, they can do a lot of good things. On the other hand, you asked about what role it has to play in adoption and the government level. So I would talk about what is being done in UAE, right? So in UAE, just a few weeks back, they legalized the digital dirham, right? So what they have is they have a deal with USDT, Tether, company behind USDT, and what they're doing is they're launching their digital dirham, right? That will be a stable coin,
right,
on the blockchain. And now that is something that opens up a lot of possibilities, right? So there's lots going on, there's a lot of potential, and there's a lot of new applications that can now be developed in UAE specifically, right? So every financial application that we can look at, it needs some form of stable currency that it could use. And one of the major issue with cryptocurrencies is that they're volatile, right? With the introduction of this stable token in UAE, what they plan to do is develop an ecosystem applications that could use the stable currency and build on top of that. So we would see that there would be a huge leap here in DeFi. Lots of products will come about that could use that as the base currency and offer a lot of different services in different sectors. It could be real estate, it could be securities, and specifically fintech and finance. These are two things that would really flourish with this thing.
Right. So I think apart from that, if you move on, we know that, for instance, the State Bank is also partnering with Al Fardan Exchange to launch a blockchain-based cross-border remittance service, which is also powered by Ripple. And there are being strides made by governmental and non-governmental sectors to just capitalize on this technology. And you have the experience of servicing global clients, international corporations, as well as the experience of working with governmental sectors. But what sort of impact do you think blockchain can have on any emerging country's economy?
So there are a few things that we should clarify, right? So blockchain is the technology, right? It's been touted as decentralized. We'll come to that later on. But as far as I see it, it's something that governments and financial institutes are using to actually streamline and make the processes more efficient, right? So there's this misconception that lots of middlemen would, be eliminated or eradicated. So I don't see it that way. I just see that those middlemen would have a different role, right? And the processes that are inefficient, that would be streamlined and become more efficient. So as a proof, we can say that, I know organizations here. There are some telecom providers that I'm working with. I cannot disclose the name at the moment, but they have developed their own technology around blockchain. And what they're trying to do is work with different organizations and develop fintech products around them. So, like you answered that, what could it do for developing economies? Even in Pakistan, there's a drive here to actually adapt blockchain, specifically with fintech. How do we streamline operations and make them more efficient, right? It's not about eliminating people. It's about making the business processes more efficient. Like you talk about remittances, right? So remittances are a messy business, So if you want to remit something from country A to country B, there is like this chain of banks that come in between. So you have got a source bank A, and then you have got this chain that runs not necessarily between those two countries, but it might be routed to different channels, right? It might end up touching 4 or 5 countries. There's lots of red tape, there's lots of processing, there's lots of, reconciliation, and that takes time. That is also a root cause for errors, and that causes delays, and that's what makes transactions so expensive. So when we have got technology like Ripple, right, or Stellar, and we talk about remittances, so what it does is essentially it allows two participating banks in two different countries to sort of settle amounts between themselves. They can shorten the chain significantly, and that means that there are fewer conversions happening, right? It's streamlined, and that's why it's efficient. So it's not about that somehow magically the banks get eliminated, right? Or you don't have to convert between things. It's just about the process becoming more efficient, right? So now there are fewer banks involved and fewer conversions involved. So for instance, if you want to transfer money from Pakistan to UAE, maybe, you have to convert the money in 2-3 steps, right? Yes. Each bank would have their own charges, they would have their own forex exchange rates, and you have to pay them and then you clear them. But if you do a remittance straight away using blockchain, what happens is the banks integrate with anchors, right? So there's a concept of an anchor in Stellar. So you have got an anchor network. There would be probably one anchor in Pakistan that would integrate tightly with the financial institutions that we have here in Pakistan, right? It's not like that it would operate independently of it. No, it's not going to happen. So what would happen is it would be a software component that would allow banks and the crypto component to come together neatly. Okay. And then they would use that component to transfer funds. And in this case, it would not be fund, it would be crypto, right? So now the conversion, in fact, instead of happening between fiat to fiat, it would happen between fiat to crypto.
Oh, okay.
Right. So they convert, let's say, Pakistani rupees to a cryptocurrency, and then that cryptocurrency is then transferred to the source at B. And over there, they can convert back to the currency of their choice. So conversion is happening. It's just the conversion changed from, rather than from fiat to fiat, it changed from fiat to crypto. And in this case, the fiat that is being used is flexible. You can have different choices, but mostly the institutes choose to use the same crypto token, right? That means it's more acceptable and it's more easily transferable between those two, reducing further, conversions between them. So that's when we talk about remittances, mostly regulated, right? So one misconception that people have is that somehow, I would transfer from my wallet to someone else's wallet and it would be just like that. No. What happens is your wallet gets linked to your formal bank accounts and the bank money is transferred via banks. It's just changing shape. It's not being transferred in fiat, but rather in crypto.
Okay. I think the way you explained this whole thing, it feels like, a certain myth has been debunked about blockchain that's been present. And I think that's really insightful. I guess when we talk about or look at any new technology, it's almost always from the lens of a consumer. But again, there's so much more to blockchain. And I feel like perhaps one of the best ways to understand technology is to first understand the capabilities that it holds. And just to expand a bit more on that, could you talk us through some of the features that blockchain has, for instance, decentralization, immutability, and transparency, which make the technology so unique and revolutionary?
Right. So when you talk about blockchain, right, it's mostly there's this notion of decentralization, right? That it's decentralized. So we should, expand that a bit more, right? Come to so that we can understand it better. So let's just talk about trilemma for a while. So when you talk about these networks, there's a concept of trilemma. That means there are 3 variables that you need to balance between, right? So you have got speed, you have got scalability, and how decentralized you are, right? Decentralization being the bit that most of the focus is on, right? That you have got a network that is spread everywhere and there's, it somehow operates autonomously or, it's free for everyone to join and things like that. But the fact is that all the blockchains that are out there, they have got this trilemma problem that they could optimize for 2 other variables, not the 3 of them. right? At least that's what the mostly commonly held belief is, right? That you can optimize for two of them. So let's say we talk about Ethereum, right? So if we talk about three parameters, we have got scalability. Ethereum is scalable. You have seen that the whole world is using it, so it's scalable, right?
Absolutely.
And it did have some problem, but they have resolved them by sharding, and they are doing more and more things to make it even more scalable. So it's scalable, right? It's decentralized. Yep, definitely it is. Anyone can join the network, and the consensus, it is one of the most decentralized out there, right? So no one has got control over that. There is no one that can disproportionately affect that, right? Then we talk about speed. So we can see that it has got scalability and it is decentralized, but it suffers with speed. Why? Because the trilemma, right? You can have either two of those. So let's talk about Binance, right? So Binance, it has got its speedier, but what's trade-off that they have made? The trade-off is that it's more centralized, right? So they have got a fixed number of validators that could, be a part of the network to validate the transactions. So it's more centralized in that sort. So it's not that decentralized. So any blockchain that we have out there, it would have to balance between these three variables. So it's not always decentralized, right? And to add to it, there's the other notion of DLT, right? So not everything is a blockchain, right? There's a term that we call distributed ledger technology. It might have components of a blockchain, but it's not exactly a blockchain. So what it is it's simply distributed databases being able to communicate with each other and sync up state, the distributed ledger technology. So prime example would be Hyperledger Fabric. So people, synonymously use the term blockchain, Hyperledger Fabric, but I would say that it's not exactly a blockchain, it's a DLT. And when we talk about corporate or enterprises or even government organizations working on those, so we can see that most of the interest is in DLT platforms. It's not on blockchains as such, right? Because, one of the problems that everyone has, even in businesses, that is privacy, right? Everyone is concerned about privacy issues, where the data goes and how it's used. So if you've got a public blockchain, it's by nature public. All the data on it, it would be public. So it doesn't lend itself beautifully to most of the use cases, right? We need to have certain protections around data, right? We can't have everyone join the network. We can't have everyone view the network, right? So we need to have controls in place. So what we have is we have got types of blockchains coming in. We have got public blockchains that we are aware of, right? And then we have got private blockchains. In a private setting, what we have is we have got all the features of blockchain, but the validators, they would be limited. There would be a few select people that would only be invited, right, to be a part of the network and form the consensus, and the data visibility is limited. When we talk about DLTs, it's even more strict, right? So in DLTs, we can talk about two organizations specifically, and then they only can, join a channel, exchange data between them. And maybe even if there are three organizations, so we can specifically control which organization sees what part of the data. It does not have to be, and it does not have to do anything with public, right? We would not like to have sensitive financial data on public infrastructure, right? Because those things are sensitive by nature. So three layers to it, public blockchains having the trilemma problem, right? There's decentralization, there's not decentralization, not so much decentralization. Then we've got private blockchains. And third, we have got the DLT phenomenon coming in. That is, being adapted mostly by enterprises to solve their use cases, such as traceability and supply chain issues.
Okay, I think that's an amazing way that, you've explained the theories and concepts that are out there and how they're being put into practice as well through different sort of mediums. Just to expand a bit more on, the technicalities or the technology itself when it comes to blockchain. What are some of the advanced applications of blockchain? We hear so much about smart contracts, decentralized finance, and even NFTs. How do these innovations work in general, and what sort of potential do you think they have?
Right. So advanced applications, right? So there are a lot of things that are being done in this domain. So let's just talk about DeFi, right? So let's just briefly touch upon that. It's a very interesting thing that you brought up. So let's just have a comparison over here, right? So if you want to make a conventional application, right? So if I want to have a fintech application right now, so what happens is there are different layers to it. There are the banks, there are the payment providers and processors, and so let's talk about Stripe. So it's a payment processor. So it integrates with different banks. You use Stripe in your application, and then you have got access to all the banks.
Okay.
If you don't want to do that, you can go to a bank, acquire their API, and then integrate it with their system. That's a very permission system, so to speak. Right? Stripe is not at liberty to integrate with any bank. So they have got to have, strict deals with them, get their APIs, they have to have licenses, and then they only integrate with those. And then you have to have a license and agreement with Stripe to use that. So if you want to develop something, there's a lot of red tape. So when you talk about DeFi, right, and the promise that I see, or rather other than decentralization, is the fact that DeFi allows different services to integrate with each other publicly, right? So if you've got a protocol, right, let's say Uniswap V2, we have got the DeFi exchange available on Ethereum, right? And if I want to make a new financial product out of it, I don't really need to have permission from anyone, right? I can simply integrate with it, pull data of finance from it, in the way that the smart contracts dictate, and use it in my application. So if I've got like 3 to 4 different services available that are DeFi, true DeFi. So what I can do is I can simply integrate them. Simple. It's like more plug and play. You pick them, it's more like Lego, you just assemble them in the form you have, and you can have a new financial service on top of them. That is simply not possible the way our current financial system is structured, right?
Okay.
So you just simply can't pick up something and use it. You have to have the, the red tape. But in the true DeFi sense, it's like very liberating. So when people talk about DeFi, they think about, decentralization and ability to move funds, wherever they want, however they want. But for me, it's more about the current financial system adopting the DeFi model, where the controls that they are still there. It's still regulated, but it can in the future, integrate more seamlessly.
Right.
So that would be a true DeFi experience, in my opinion.
I think that's really insightful, and the fact that I feel perhaps blockchain is truly a transformative technology, and it's weaving together a complex chain of control and creating a true many-to-many service engine. And I just want to understand, in your opinion, what are some of the core bottlenecks that blockchain has to overcome in order to be perhaps more scalable?
Right. So, like I mentioned earlier, right? So one of the main challenges from an adoption point of view, right? So that is user experience, right? People are familiar with system that they use, right? People are not that tech savvy. People always have this adoption friction. Whenever you bring in a new system, they will always find it difficult to adapt to it, right? So one of the major hurdles is that the user experience of Web3 is not that streamlined. So there's lots of activity to streamline that from a user point of view. Okay. But more than that, the main issue is speed, right? So if we talk about Visa, right, that is the benchmark, right? So it is processing millions of transactions per day, right? And you don't even feel that, right? So you swipe your card and your transaction goes through. So you don't have to wait a few minutes at the line, to have your transaction going through or maybe getting rejected, right? And then thousands of people can do it simultaneously, and there's not a problem.
Yeah.
But with current ecosystem that we have, speed is an issue, right? We have got anywhere from sometimes a dozen to 100 with Ethereum to perhaps 1,000 transactions per second. That is too slow, right? That is too slow even for, a particular business, right? So you would have thousands or millions of transactions coming in any second. And if you're going at scale, you could have billions of transactions. That's what's happening at scale. So these systems are not at that place right now.
Okay.
So what's happening is there's a lot of work around layer 2s. So what a layer 2 does is it is a faster version of blockchain that allows transactions to happen off the network, off the main network. So you can have thousands of transactions going on something like Polygon, right?
Okay.
So Polygon is a side chain, layer 2 chain. You have transact on Polygon. It's much faster, much cheaper. And what it does is it integrates directly with Ethereum. So all the transactions that happen on Polygon, their proof is submitted on Ethereum. So it has got the security and guarantees that Ethereum provides, but it can, liberate you. You can have faster transactions. So now what the focus is to have lots of these layer 2s coming in, right? And there is also the concept that each business can have their own layer 2 or sidechain, so that you're not limited by the speed of the main network.
Okay.
So instead of having to send all your transactions on the main network, which is also very expensive and slow, you can have your own sidechain, process your transactions over there, and then just submit one transaction on the main network to have a proof that the transactions went through. So there's this lot of activity going on around layer 2s. That is the scalability thing that is started to, resolve this problem. But there's still a long way to go, right? We have to reach millions of transactions per second. We are getting there, but we are not yet there. But this is the direction that seems to be where it would lead. That would lead to it.
Okay, I think blockchain is so fascinating as you've described it, and it's definitely opening up a world of possibilities for consumers as well as industries alike. However, like there has been certain trepidation regarding the scalability of the technology, given that there's a requirement for the energy and a certain resource allocation to maintain the system. But I also understand the fact that there has been significant progress to make these systems more efficient. But how do you think blockchain can become much more sustainable?
So to answer that, we need to understand what has happened, and what was happening in the past. So if we talk about blockchain, right, specifically Bitcoin, sorry. So that is something that is actually what's creating this impression of being very power hungry. That is a fact. Blockchain, Bitcoin uses a lot of power. But having said that, most of the blockchains have moved away from proof of work, right? So proof of work is the thing, the magic sauce that is actually consuming all that power in Bitcoin, right? So Ethereum earlier on was proof of work, but now it has moved to proof of stake. And most of the blockchains are now using friendlier algorithms that don't need to have as much power. In fact, no power at all. It's like typical computer system doing, what it does. So the power consumption has gone down drastically, right? So when you think about blockchain, if you're thinking about Bitcoin, yes, that is consuming power. But for most of the part, all of the blockchains, they are not doing so. They are very efficient and they are good at doing what they do. So power is no longer an issue, especially if you want to develop applications on top of it.
I think that's really promising. And blockchain, after all, it's just not any other technology. It's poised to revolutionize digital infrastructures. And one of the most exciting aspects of this particular transformation is the rise of the Web 3.0 concept, a concept of decentralized internet powered by blockchain technology. To move towards a model where users have more control, privacy, and ownership on their own information is really exciting. How do you see this decentralization changing the way that we interact with digital services?
So I have a different opinion on this thing, right? So if you look what's happening on ground, the reality is a bit different, right?
Okay.
So like we discussed before that blockchain is more about making processes more efficient, right? That's what the focus is primarily. From a consumer point of view, there is activity, right, where the blockchain purists, right, they want to have a decentralized future, right, where everything is decentralized. It's a good idea, right, and it would be beneficial, right? But if you look at how the world is structured right now, there are these big organizations, right? They have got this billions of dollars transaction happening, right? And in some places, there are these clearing houses that have got trillions of dollars transactions that are being cleared through them, right? So do you really feel that it's in their interest that the world decentralizes? I don't think that's the case, right? And specifically, if you look at what's happening in the financial sector, right? So there's these countries that are having massive experiments with CBDCs, right? So we have got China, Russia, India, right? They have got CBDCs in the pilot phase, right? So they're actually piloting different experiments in the countries where they're experimenting with how CBDCs work out. If we talk about the USA, they are in the research phase for implementing CBDCs. So essentially, what is a CBDC? It's a more centralized form of the same thing that we're talking about, right? So it's like crypto, but centralized. So what I see is that we are actually moving towards a more centralized future where these things would centralize but be more efficient, right? What's currently happening is we are I think it's a transitionary phase, right? So we are in a transition. But the focus currently that is in the organizations, right, at the top tier, country level, government level, enterprise level, that is actually on pilots that actually allow for intermingling of both these technologies, right? So the focus of CBDCs is not to replace, fiat. It's not, at least not currently. What they're trying to do is they're going to coexist with the infrastructure. Just imagine that trillions of dollars of transactions using some infrastructure, and you just can't have a flag day and say, all right, from tomorrow we shift over to some new tech, right? Do CBDCs or whatever. So what they're doing is they're building this infrastructure that coexists with the current one, right? The Swift is bringing up different pilots and projects where they're experimenting how to settle tokenized assets using the same infrastructure. When you talk about CBDCs, most of the experiments are about how to settle funds, right, using the same infrastructure, but one portion of it can be a CBDC, right? So you've got CBDCs coming in, and then you've got fiat. How do you sell them? How do you trade between them? So most of the pilots are focused on this thing, that how do these interoperate? And what I see is that gradually, right, in some years, like maybe 5, 10, 20, I can't predict that, we'll gradually move from 1% adoption to 20, 30, 40, 50, and 100%, where CBDCs would take over. So in that case, that's centralization, right? That's Orwellian. But I feel that's inevitable. But, some things that might be decentralized, that could be something like your identity, right? So I've worked with DHS on a few grants, and where they're experimenting with the concept of SSI, self-sovereign identities, right? So they have got these active grants coming in where they want to have people come and solve their use cases using SSI and blockchain.
Okay.
Right. So that's one avenue where I do see that blockchain is being adapted, but it's not in the way that people envision it would be. It's more like you're changing your physical ID cards into an electronic form of them, where you own your identity, but you have to rely on trusted parties to issue credentials to you, right? So in the future, what could happen is with SSI that I own my identity, right? And the government issues to me my ID card. The government issues to me my driver's license. Okay. Or different other organizations could issue to me verified credentials that I own and I can use. I can choose who to share with. How does that contrast with the current model? That maybe would help you understand better. So currently what happens is, if we talk about our identity, that is controlled by different organizations, right? So if I talk about my Facebook ID, all the identity and everything is controlled by an organization. And in order for me to access that, I have to log into the system, and then I can access that.
Yeah.
With SSI, that would not be required. With SSI, I would have my identity and all the identifiers that I have gathered from different organizations on my cell phone, right? So now the identity would not be spread will not be with a single organization or entity or in different silos, maybe multiple organizations, but I'd have them in my phone. So that significantly, reduces attack surface. Right. So now for hackers to actually steal identity, they would have to hack into an individual phone, and they could only steal one person's identity. In contrast to what's happening today. So every single person, 4 billion users of Facebook, they all have their identity on a server. If someone hacks into it, so that means all those credentials are lost. So that's what would change. That's where I do see some positive coming out, but that is way into the future.
I guess we are all at risk then. The way you explained this whole thing, and I love the way that you took examples to contrast between centralized and decentralized, and that at least to me it paints a different picture when it comes to blockchain. Nevertheless, I just still feel like blockchain will impact peer-to-peer transactions, even content creation and governance, perhaps. What sort of industries or sectors do you feel which would be most impacted by this disruption or this shift?
So the way I see it, it's mostly because of compulsion, right? So organizations would have to switch to blockchain because there are different regulations coming in that are forcing them to look for solutions. And in most cases, blockchain is a better solution. It's more suited to it. So if we talk about DDP in EU, right? So they have launched that everything should have a digital passport, right? So in that case, one of the main technology that could solve that challenge, and that is like a few years in the future, right? So we need to have technologies that could help establish everyone having their DPP, the digital passport. So in that case, blockchain is a good contender. We have got securities, right? There's lots of shift towards that. Recently, 100 million worth of securities were launched in Germany, right? So ABN AMRO Bank, they recently acquired a startup. They used that as a digital asset management company and launched those securities onto the blockchain. So things are being launched on the blockchain. Things are moving to the blockchain, but it's mostly a necessity, to have more efficient processes, to streamline things. That's the way I see things.
I think that's really promising. And just moving towards the final sort of questions that I'm going to be covering. In terms of looking ahead, what are some of the challenges that you foresee when it comes to realizing the true vision of Web 3.0? Do you feel like there are any technical, regulatory, or societal hurdles that need to be addressed before this whole, decentralization becomes a reality?
So like I discussed, we will move to a world where, blockchain is a more inherent part of it. Things will move to the blockchain. How decentralized it is, it remains to be seen. I feel that it might not be as decentralized as blockchain purists want it to be, but things would be moving to the blockchain, like securities, your identity, and everything else, that would follow suit. And it's happening right now. But the most challenge would be, like we discussed, user experience from the consumer end, right? So you have to dull it down to a point where it's no longer a hurdle. It matches the current user expectations, right? Expectations about how people interact with the system, right? Username, password, biometrics, how much time it takes to do a transaction. If someone can do a transaction in 1 second, he won't wait 1 minute to do that, right? So that's actually a regression in terms of user experience. So people wanted to optimize, not to go back, right? People would want it to happen in half a second, not in 1 minute. So user experience needs to go down. That's one side. On the other end, when you talk about blockchain, we have to, it's mostly financial, right? It's mostly about financial transactions. Even if you talk about NFTs, right? So when you buy and sell an NFT, you have to buy something, right? So you're paying for it. So inherently, blockchain, it has got an element of finance to it. And when you talk about real world applications of it, as we discussed, it's mostly financial, right? So if a business is using it for, for their purposes, to settle trade, to open up letter of credits, to track the supply chain, that is almost always linked to finance, right? So there's funds moving in and out. There's movement of goods. There's definitely movement of funds. It's a financial transaction. If you talk about asset tokenization, right? So you tokenize an asset, do what? You sell it, right? So it becomes a security or whatever form it takes, but you have to exchange it for funds. So whenever I talk about blockchain, it's always linked with finance, right? Not with the exception of, identity stuff, where we have got the self-sovereign identity, that's something different. But mostly it's financial. And when we talk about finance, we have to be very careful about, regulations. Finance is a very regulated industry, right? It cannot exist in a silo. Expecting that I'd be able to transfer money to someone else and he'd be able to use that without any KYC, ML, that is not possible. Even today, it's not possible. People can transfer money to someone else, but in order to be able to use that, at some point, you have to have KYC, ML, right? So if you are in the US and you want to use the funds that you've got, right? So you have to be registered with some exchange. And there are certain limits to it. So I think it's on $10,000. So if you've got $10,000 or less, right, in crypto holdings, it's fine. As soon as you cross that, you need to have KYC, ML coming in. So you need to verify, you need to prove that who you are, where the funds are coming from, and then also file a taxes on top of that, right? So in any other country, right? So if I had $1 million in my crypto account, and if I were to transfer it to you, right? So you'd be $1 million richer, right? But now you need to use them, right?
Yeah.
So how do you buy something from it? If you buy a property, what happens?
I'll probably have to declare something. I mean,
Yeah,
there
definitely.
has to be
You can
some transparency.
transfer to someone the $1 million and buy a property, but when you actually transfer the property, he'd have to declare it somewhere that I am selling this property to him, to Taimur, for this much money, and this is how much tax I'm going to pay in terms of capital gain or whatever taxes there are. And then you'd have to declare that you have this property and you bought it for some amount of money, right? So within certain limits, right? If you're doing small amounts, it doesn't really matter. You can transact in small amounts and you can be under the radar, right? But if you're actually using it to buy commodities, right? So at some point you'd have to declare them, right? That I bought this commodity with this amount of money and this is where the money came from. Until unless you're a terrorist and buying, something very fishy, right? In that case, you don't have to declare that, because in that case, that's what the problem is, that it is very convenient for malicious actors to trade stuff using crypto and bypass all the regulations, and that is exactly what the organizations don't want. And I guess to some extent we also don't want that, because in order for the world to be safe, we need to have checks and balances, so that ensures that malicious actors cannot freely trade goods that do harm to us, right? So this is my 2 cents on it, on the scenario that it has to be regulated. Definitely, it will be regulated, right? So if you talk about securities, right, there is securities laws in America. If you are talking about UAE, there are laws around how you trade securities, and there, DIRC and WARA, they are actively introducing new laws. And where there are no laws, they have got regulations that strictly forbid that. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? So they are undecided about what to do, right? So they outright, ban that, right? Because they don't know what to do with it. So they will bring regulate that. Only then would crypto be in the mainstream in KSA. Similar in Pakistan, we have got these ban on crypto. Why? Because, if it goes unregulated, they have got lots of problem, right? So if you have got unregulated crypto, people could use that and transfer funds, and we can get into trouble like we got earlier. We have got this FATF regulations, right? FATF. Pakistan went into the grey list. Even advanced countries are not spared from that. UAE was in that FATF. So countries need to be careful at the government level, right, of their image, of how they operate. And that's why I don't see that it could be given a free hand. In certain limits, right, you should, like I mentioned, small amounts, fine, you can do that. But if it exceeds certain amount, then you have to, bring in those checks and balances to ensure that things are compliant. And, KYC, AML, these are necessary things, just the basics. There are a lot of advanced things coming, but these are the basics that would need to be there always.
I think you've summed it up so well, and that actually wraps up our conversation for today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here on the podcast, Zaid. Thank you so much, and I really hope to see you again.
Thank you, Taimur. It was a pleasure. Same here.